Robin, can you tell us a little bit about what you were doing, what was going on in your life when you first heard about the Peace Camp?
Yeah, when I first heard about the Peace Camp, I was in college. I was going to SUNY Binghamton, and I was studying history, focusing on women's history and women's studies. And I was involved with the Women's Center and doing a lot of different feminist political activity. I wasn't one of the organizers of the Women's Pentagon Action, but I was one of the organizers to get busloads of people of women from the university that I was at to go to the second Women's Pentagon Action. And so I was pretty involved with things on campus that way. And I heard about it because the Peace Camp, I don't remember exactly how far, but it was about maybe like a 2.5-hour drive from the university, and just word came through about it. And at first I wasn't too sure about it, because I think when I first heard about it, I thought, I don't remember, I just wasn't quite sure. I wasn't involved in anti-nuclear work, and even though I supported it, but it wasn't where my focus was. And I think I went to the first, it must have been the July 4th action, the very first one, because I went to my father's wedding. He was marrying his third wife, and they were having a wedding in some place, and I went with my brother, and I really wanted to be at the Peace Camp, but then, my father was getting married. It was one of those things. So I did the daughter obligation thing, and I went to the wedding, but then I told my brother, you need to drop me off here, because I'll go to the wedding, but I have to go to this. And so I had directions, and but we were traveling at night, and my brother was getting more and more annoyed because we couldn't find it, because we're going through all these little old roads to Romulus, and it always seems further away when you haven't been there before and when it's nighttime. And by the time we got there, we were just really angry with each other, and he was really angry with me, and I just opened the door and got out, and he took off with his girlfriend, and there I am in the whatever time at night it was, very late, and I had my bedroll, because I don't even think I had a sleeping bag at that point, and whatever things I was carrying with me, and it was dark, and I remember there was a few women who were sleeping. All I saw at that point was a woman sleeping on the grass in front, and a woman came up and said, "Oh, welcomed me," and showed me a place I could sleep that was, I think it was just on the grass or something near the front house. And I woke and slept, and then I woke up and there were all these women. It was just like, it was just amazing, because there were so many. It was so quiet when I came, and it was so not quiet when I woke up. And I realized that all of them had been here, but they were back further on the land or whatever. So I just remember waking up and just going, wow, I'm here. And this is so amazing. At that point, there was all these workshops happening, and affinity group, and civil disobedience training. So I hooked up with women because there was this way, it was encouraged to do that. And so you were with people you didn't know, but then you were in this training together. So I think that was it. And so I was there. I only was there for, I think, that weekend, because then I had to go back. Well, it was the summer, so I don't understand. But I had to go back to Binghamton, so I was only there for the weekend. And I went after that back to Binghamton, and I decided to end up coming back to the Peace Camp in August and staying a month at that point. And I was there for the bigger the August 1st. So the August 1st, yeah, that was there for the August 1st action. So I stayed a chunk of time then.
So you said that when you first heard about it, you kind of weren't that sure, but when you showed up that first weekend, there was something that made you want to come back?
Yeah, I think mostly because there was just all these amazing women. That was it. You know, I part of my thing of why I wasn't so much into the anti-nuclear for myself at that point up to then is because I was into, there's all this stuff happening right now about how women are being treated, how just all this, kids are being treated, things are happening in Central America right now, and here we're talking about, there's the anti-nuclear seemed more like white, middle-class male thing. Not that there weren't women and other people of color who were involved in it, but it didn't resonate with me, even though enough to be part of. But when I started being at the peace camp, I saw how all these connections were starting to be made that I hadn't ever heard before, even in, you know, that of the connections between anti-nuclear and El Salvador and rape and how children are being treated, and all that was being brought together in a way that was really exciting to me, and how I was thinking about other things, and so it was the first time that I really started thinking about the anti-nuclear as being something that that really was something that that felt strongly enough that I wanted to be part of organizing to change that as well. So, and the only way I really could do it for myself was if it was all connected, and it was being addressed in an interconnected way.
Did you identify as a feminist or a lesbian or nonviolent when you arrived at the encampment?
I identified as a lesbian and a feminist, and I don't think the nonviolent wasn't something I identified with as it wasn't part of my own philosophy at that point. I wasn't someone who was, I mean, it makes sense that I came to that point, but it wasn't something that I strongly identified with. One thing that's interesting for me now in terms of it is the first night when I got dropped off, the woman who actually showed me a place to sleep on the grass, she said something. She came and she was showing me, and she was a woman who had a cane. She had some type of disability, and she was using a cane. And she said something to me, something about us Crips. And that was I never, even though I had a disability, I didn't really connect. I didn't have a connection within the disability community at that point. And I wasn't ever a term I used for myself, and never heard anyone else refer. And so I had this little bit of reaction, but I was like, okay, you know, and I thought, it was new to me, and that a word was being used in a positive way, and that she was including me into this group that she was part of, and I remember just kind of internally having a little stop, and not really, and one of those things where you think, okay, I'm going to think about this later or something, but. And and I don't remember connecting with her anymore after that. There were just so many women there, but that in some ways it was the beginning of also realizing of how much there was an intention of trying to create the camp to be as accessible as possible for women with disabilities, and that was a new thing for me as well.
What were some of the things that let you know that there was an attempt to make it accessible?
The most visible things you get, of course, with stuff like this, you get the most visible at first. The boardwalk, the fact that there was a boardwalk that was all the way back to the end of the land, and there was signs that said, for differently abled women. There was pointing to certain directions for whatever things there were, and those were that was probably the most visible. And I think in some ways, looking back at the camp, there was the strong points, and then there was the not strong points, but that was a strong point in terms of trying to make it as physically accessible as possible. So, but at that point, I mean, that's in hindsight, because that wasn't where my brain was at that point. I was aware of it, and I thought, oh, this is cool, but I didn't really connect with it as much on a personal level. So, but anyway, this woman was so welcoming, and so being there and just it quickly became a place that felt like home, you know, that felt like I'd never been in a community that just felt so welcoming and that was so celebrating women's strengths, of all sorts of strengths, and encouraging us to go for our whatever we felt like we wanted to do. So,
were there skills that you picked up that you didn't have before?
I'm sure chopping wood after in a little bit, you know, the following, let's see, I guess it was that was in 83. The following year in 84, I ended up living at the peace camp over the winter, so that's definitely a thing of learning to chop wood and stack wood and the best ways of stacking wood and having airflow coming and, you know, those types of things. You just, you know, swinging a hammer and helping to build things, how to cook for so many people. There's a lot of organizing work, you know, how to just, it's hard to even say per se of what each thing was, because it just became part of the daily life and not like, oh, here's something I didn't know. Though I do, one thing that does stick out in my brain as I'm talking about it is the winter I lived there of our pipes freezing and Mary Hilton showing me how to use the blowtorch to repair the broken pipe. So there were things like that for sure.
Back to that first summer, what can you tell us about August 1st? What do you remember of that?
I was arrested on August 2nd, I think it was. But August was there's things that stick out, is that we had the long the march with all the thousands of women, you know, and it was wild. It was amazing. There were all these women from all over, and it was just so powerful. I remember just, you know, as we're slowly marching and having to stop at certain points, and I was way back in the middle or whatever, so I didn't really see what was going on necessarily, why we were being stopped at points and why we were pausing or why we were going so slow. But I do remember at one point passing this Pentecostal church, and there was it turned out to be like the wife of the pastor there had a microphone, and she was standing out there and she was singing things like, you know, God bless America. And then there were women in the audience, women in the march who just started singing along with her, and that was really pissing her off, because it was supposed to be like her song. We weren't, you know, how dare you sing God bless America, you know, because you're anything but, you know, God positive or whatever. So, but it was that kind of thing of just everyone was so happy, and they were just taking this situation and turning it into something else. Here's this negative energy, we're going to turn it into a positive energy. Oh, you're trying to verbally beat us down, and we're taking it and we're turning it into something else. So I learned from that. I think that was when I started learning about outside of a workshop about nonviolence, and how you don't have to react to something. You can change it. And change it so how it doesn't. You don't take it inside, and if you bring it in, then you turn it into something else, and also how there's power in that you're doing it with all these other people. That it's, you know. I remember later on, as we got to down to the base, that the same woman at one point, there was a bunch of counter demonstrators there, and they were yelling all kinds of things and very homophobic and lots of commie dyke things at us. And the same woman, I remember, had there's all these American flags, and you know, and at one point there were some women who were going over the fence or getting ready to go over the fence, and there were others who were circling around to keep them, because there was a police line, and then there were women on the outside of these women who were at the fence, and I believe there was a police line too, but we didn't want the police to be the ones who were next to the women. But there was, but at one point I do remember, one woman, this same woman, she had a flag and she was poking women in the back with it. And I just was thinking, God, this isn't like Christians I've been around, or this just seems so un-Christian-like behavior. And I remember her saying, I know I'm going to have to pray to God to ask me to forgive me tomorrow, but it feels good today. And and I was just flabbergasted. I'd never come across such intense hatred in that way before. And from someone who's supposed to be, at least how I would view it, supposed to be coming from a place of caring about people if you're saying you're a Christian or something. So the other thing I remember that the pastor, the husband of this woman, was there as well. And I remember Catherine going up to him and shaking his hand, saying hi. And I think she said, I'm a Christian too. She might have said, I'm a spiritual person too. But them shaking hands, and I saw that, and I was just soaking it all in. This was my first being around all this, and I was soaking that in, and just like getting so much of, yeah, there is another way of doing this. Because up to this point, I had been in political things, which I wasn't being judgmental about that it was wrong, but it was a lot of like, with all this stuff happening in El Salvador and Central America, there was a lot of, when you go to protest, it was, it was just a lot of reaction. And it was, and there was a lot of us and them. And this was trying to break down that us and them, us and them, not us and them, us and them. So it was just different. I hadn't been around that before. And it was something that I learned from, not even so much in a conscious way, but yes, in a conscious way as well, but just more in taking it in, and it changing the way I thought to relate to people. Not that I didn't still have reactions, but it was different. It did change me in that way. This is in terms of how it affected me in some ways. After I left the camp that first summer in '83, the first month of being there, and then it was time to go back to college, and I needed more credits to graduate, but I had come to this point of just being really, I guess you could say, disillusioned with what I saw at even among academic feminists. And there's all this there's all this backbiting and who was getting tenure and who wasn't, and it didn't, I was in that heyday of being at the peace camp and of, sisterhood is powerful, and how we treat each other as part of the revolution. And then I didn't see that, and I had been thinking of wanting to teach women's history and do women's studies, and I came to this crisis of myself of, okay, I don't want to do this. If this is what it is, I don't want it. And I didn't know what I did want, so I decided, coming from a place of not having very much money, of why pay to go to school if I don't know what I want? In hindsight, I don't know if it was the best decision, but it was my decision at the time. And I dropped out of college, and I went back and lived with my mother for a little bit, and then I worked and saved money, and then I came to the peace camp the following. So that's part of why I didn't go back, and partly I think the other part of it is that at the time when I was there in the summer of '83, there was this assumption that it was going to end, that the peace camp was going to end after the end of the summer, and although I think by the end of the summer I knew that was changing, my energy at that point it wasn't right for me. I needed to do something else. I needed to figure out what I was going to do and how to make money and that kind of thing. And I didn't see being at the camp as being an option for me at that point. So once the following summer happened, and it was still happening, I was like, whoa, I'm going back there. It was so wonderful for me. And I went back the following summer. But I think in '83 in the summer as well, that was the year that we took the bus and we went to Washington. Wasn't that '83? Was it '84? It was '83 for the March on Washington. And and one of the things I remember was just a lot of singing on that bus. So much singing of all the peace camp songs, and when we got to Washington, we set up a peace camp in Lafayette Park, across from the White House, and I I remember that there were police who were making their rounds, and up to that point their job was to make sure that nobody felt, there was a rule that you couldn't fall asleep there, and it was their way of keeping homeless people out of the park at night, because you can't have homeless people sleeping across from the White House. What's the world going to think? So we set up our tents and all that kind of thing, but with the intention of, with the intention of being a visible presence as a peace camp there. And some women got arrested who were laying down in their bags, and I wasn't one of them. So I'm trying to remember. I think there were, because we didn't know it was there was some concern because we had our bus going back, but I don't remember all the details about that. I think there was like, what's going to happen, and here we have these women and they got arrested for this, and there was some little bit of there's always controversy about something, because even though we're all coming in this together, we do come from our different places in it, and there was some stuff about it, but I don't quite remember all the details about it really. I just remember it happening, and my mother telling me the story, which I'll just pass on, that when she was watching the television and saw this news report that there was this march and that there's women from the peace camp who had gotten arrested there. Or maybe maybe they didn't say peace camp, but maybe they had a thing and they showed a sign and it says Women's Peace Camp. And my mother was like, oh, she didn't even know I was there. And she ended up calling, getting the number for the Washington, D.C. Police Department, and calling and saying, my daughter's part of the peace. Was she arrested? Her name's Robin Foster. Has she been arrested? And can you tell me if she's in jail there? And the cop saying, lady, they're all Jane Does. Which one? If you want to tell me which one who's your daughter, tell me. But all we have are Jane Does here. So anyway, you think you're just going to go to a thing and you're not going to have repercussions have to deal with it with the rest of your family, but it wasn't the case.
Was your family supportive?
My mother was. The rest of them were. My brother was kind of. No, I wouldn't say he was supportive. I would say my mother was. She was, and I think as the time passed, she was more so. I think she had her stuff around it. I think it all seemed so radical, and that was scary. But it took some time. But then she was more supportive. So.
I have a question about the march, but then I want to go back to your mom.
Sure.
Had you ever been to mass marches like on Washington?
Oh yeah,
before this?
I had gone to a number of U.S. El Salvador marches. I had been to a march in New York. That was that was at the Peace Camp. I had been at some march in New York for something before. So yeah, we had been there before.
Was there anything noticeably different for you to be there as part of the peace camp women versus when you had been to marches prior?
Right. Well, and also this march I went to as well, it wasn't a women's, and I'd been to Women's Pentagon Action. So in terms of the march I went to on Washington with the peace camp, we were just one group amongst all these other women and men who were there. So being within the group I was in, it was like a huge affinity group or something. And in some ways it was like what I had with the Women's Pentagon Action, where there's a lot of, one thing that with the Women's Pentagon Action, also with the peace camp, there was a lot of street theater. And I'm sure there was amongst other radical groups as well, but it was different, it felt different. So that was one of the things that was probably at the peace camp and at all the things of Women's Pentagon Action was the things of bringing in song and weaving web, using yarn to create webs that then represent connections between us all and the earth, and dance. There was all of that art incorporated into it, and that was what's the word? It's kind of like it just brought a lot of energy, just brought a lot of energy. And that was something that was a little bit different than what I had done in other marches, except for the women. I guess it was the women's marches that had that more of that I remember anyway.
So then I want to go back to August 1st action, because you were telling us that you got arrested on August 2nd.
Oh, August 2nd, right.
That's what happened.
Okay, I'll try to remember. I was in an affinity group, and we decided that instead of doing what seemed like a lot of the going over the fence stuff was, that we were going to blockade the truck gate. So we weren't at the main gate, we were at the truck gate, and so that things couldn't go in and out. And so I went with this group of women there, and we basically sat there, blockading, and they didn't do anything for quite a while. And meanwhile, of course, the counter demonstrators are coming, and all this is happening, and we're singing and doing all of our usual, stuff. And honestly, I'm having a hard time remembering. And I think what also happened for me was, I wanted to go over the fence, but I didn't know if I could. And I have one foot I have doesn't turn. It's kind of like my foot's like this. So I didn't know if I could make that turn over the fence and put my other foot on. So I ended up going under the fence. I was able to do that.
Did everybody in that affinity group, were you all going to go over the fence at some point?
I don't remember.
No.
I don't remember. I don't think so. But I don't remember.
Okay.
I got arrested with other people.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to remember if some got arrested just for blockading or if it was when we went over or under. And I don't really remember. I think part of, for me, that was an exciting point of it, but I had so many other experiences of being at the peace camp that was just one of many, and it wasn't like the top thing for me. I mean, I can't say if there was a top thing, but you know what I mean? So I was like, oh yeah, that's when I got my one time of getting arrested at the peace camp. But it was just one of the things, and I think that was a lot of what the peace camp was about, at least it became more so after the summer of '83, is that it was, it became about how you're living and how you're being in the world, and not so much just about climbing the fence and getting arrested.
Had you been arrested for civil disobedience anywhere before that?
No, I think that was my first time. I'm pretty sure that was my first time, right, because the other time I'd been arrested that was peace camp related, but not at the peace camp, was at the Not in Our Name action.
You said at the outset that the whole nuclear war thing, the arms race stuff, wasn't something that was that present in your actions at that time or activities. Did that change for you in the course of being at the encampment?
It did, because once I got to that thing of making those connections, that it was the same type of thought, energy that would allow the use even of developing nuclear weapons, and the possibility of being used was the same that allowed for, creation of poverty or rape or just that type. It was violence. There was a power over energy that was the basis for this, and it was in patriarchy, and how this is all connected. And that it wasn't isolated. It wasn't just like, oh, here's these nuclear weapons, and yes, the world can be destroyed. It's like, okay, what allows for that even to be in this world at this point, and for people to even consider the possibility of either using them or threatening to use them, was the same thing that allowed for all this other shit to happen. And so that was, I started making those connections, and then it became something that I felt it was important for me to struggle against.
When you said you thought maybe it would only be for the summer, so then when it kept going, you're kind of like, yay, but do you have any memory of when you realized it might continue, or were you a part of any of those discussions one way or the other for it to continue?
I think I was there. I kind of vaguely remember some of the discussions about to continue or not to continue, and I felt like I didn't have a strong opinion one way or the other at that point. And I might have left before the final decisions were made. And I think what happens is I could kind of see both points, or or some of the points, but I didn't. Maybe because I wasn't I was there basically as a participant. I wasn't one of the organizers, and so I felt like I didn't have I don't know if I felt like I didn't have as much say, but maybe that's why I didn't have as much invested. I think that's what it was. I didn't have as much invested in it continuing or not continuing. It was what I was doing, and I wasn't thinking beyond that at that point. I think I just knew I had to do something different, so I couldn't make a commitment. But I do remember being there when some of the discussion was happening, though.
And that first summer, other than the woman with the cane that greeted you,
Mm-hmm.
Were there other visibly physically disabled women that you saw at the camp that first summer? Or?
I'm sure there must have been. I don't remember exactly. I don't remember if I did. If I did, it was probably, if I thought more about it, I could. But I don't remember specific women. I know there were women there who had disabilities, but it's not something that was a big focus for me of trying to connect on disability. I wasn't there to connect with disabled women.
Did you make friendships or relationships that first summer that continued after you left the camp?
A lot of them I saw for the second summer. So I would say yes, but over the period of years, the few years that I was there, it's hard to say exactly who I just saw in the first and not the rest.
After you left the end of the summer of '83 and went back to Binghamton, you
Mm-hmm.
thought, and so I was just curious if you stayed in touch with people.
Oh, for that year? No, I don't think I did. I think I went back. I kind of dealt with my business of I'm not going to go to school anymore. I went to Syracuse. I got a job at a library. After looking for work, I got a job, and I was basically just doing the work thing and living at my mother's and trying to figure out what I was going to do. What do I want to do next? But in the meantime, just kind of taking a break. I'd just been in school for 4 years. I just had this thing at the Peace Camp, and I was in a not sure what I wanted to do with my life thing, and I think at that point, and maybe it's just where I was at. I think I was taking a break from thinking. I'm looking back. Maybe I don't know. I could be wrong. Maybe I was doing a lot of thinking, but I don't. It's interesting to me that I just worked for a year, but I guess that's what I did.
Having grown up in Syracuse, being in that upstate area, was it in your consciousness that the Seneca Army Depot existed? And
No.
there may or may not be weapons there?
No, not at all. I never even heard about it. Didn't know it was there. It was probably like an hour and a half drive away, but I had never heard about it. And I think the thing, even around the nuclear weapons, I didn't hear about that till I was in college. But I don't know if anyone in my family even knew about it. I doubt it. It wasn't until I was there that they really started knowing more about it. I was working part-time as a library page, making minimum wage. I did a lot of traveling back and forth. I did my first real hitchhiking to get to the Peace Camp. I didn't hitchhike all the time, and I certainly didn't tell my mother I was hitchhiking, but I hitchhiked a few times to the camp, and very nervously, and then I would go back and I would work. I think I worked like 3 days a week or something like that. So for a while I spent a few days a week at the Peace Camp and then a few days at home. And then I started feeling a little, that was a strange experience, because I remember feeling like here I am going into this radical community, very women-focused, lesbian-focused community, and then going back and staying at my mom's and working at the library. And I felt a little like I had two different things. I did have two different things, but it was not integrated. So it was difficult emotionally for me. But I really wanted to be at the camp. But I didn't know what I was going to do because of the money thing. So I think I did that for about a month, maybe a little bit longer. And then I gave notice at my job. I decided to live at the Peace Camp and be there for a while. And so that was in the beginning of end of August, beginning of September, that I moved to the Peace Camp. So I kind of did like a year thing. It was kind of like I'd been to the Peace Camp to like the beginning of September, Labor Day of '83. I left, worked, and then was at the camp again in August, I think, of '84. and then moved to the camp in September. So I kind of like skipped a whole year, basically, and came back. And I remember of '84 that there were still a lot of women, but there were fewer than the year before. But and a lot of the women who were there were women who had been there the year before and came back or something, or maybe they came first. But that's, I would say '84 is when I first really developed friendships with people, women that stayed with me. So that was when it became kind of phase 2 for me of my involvement with the peace camp. The first year, I would say, was more, like the first year, just to backtrack a little bit, that was when I did my first spray painting thing too. Like, actually, I didn't do it. I was more of like there were some women who had painted the over the overpass of the, was it the railroad thing? People First? Was it People First? Something like that. And they had done it. And then they had to go back because, I don't know, some letter was done wrong or something happened or they didn't finish the letter because the police were coming. And I really wanted to go. And I remember a couple of the women who were there, or at least one of them, and I just asked if could I come too. So we had to put on our whatever clothing we had to wear and put things so we would blend into the brush around, and we kind of had our flashlights and snuck over and it's like, okay, any cars coming? And then, so I was part of the group of doing that, though I don't think I really did anything besides get really excited and was glad that I was with this group of women who were doing these things. So that was my first participating in a group that was actually, because I couldn't reach the thing. They all knew what they were doing. I felt like I was like, it's kind of like the apprentice to I was like my apprentice spray painting thing. So that was very exciting. That was the exciting, it's kind of, and doing something direct action where I was doing something and I wasn't going to get arrested, hopefully, because I already had my my ban and bar. So, and so that happened. That was still back in '83, but the following, summer '84, it became, we were still doing the political actions, but it just felt like it was there was more of also creating community. And we're still focusing on the base and doing all this, but there was a lot also of just how do we live together? How do we deal with the differences between us? Where's like the smoking and the non-smoking people? There's the middle class and working class. There was all the, loud music players and the not music players and the fire, and in the beginnings, also the very beginning of '84 was we started doing the fire walks that Lindsay had come and she brought this with her and shared it with us, those of us who participated in it. And that was a big deal for me in my life. I hadn't ever consciously done ritual really before, and I had been really disconnected in some ways spiritually. Like I had grown up in a family where my father's side of the family especially was fundamentalist Christian, and my mom was a Christian, and there was a point in my life as a young teenager that I identified as a Christian, and as I became more and more aware as an older teenager and in my early 20s of sexism, and then became a lesbian, I felt I kind of gave up on all that. I just let go of the God stuff, and and I went through a phase of being very not religious, not spiritual, and not because I didn't have anything that felt right to me. And so it wasn't I started going to the peace camp and starting doing being part of circles where we were doing ritual, and then I think it was prior to doing the fireworks, but I also just became, okay, there is something about connection with life and energies and how we treat each other and animals and the air and the earth and how all of that is sacred. And so for me it was a time of kind coming into that spiritual connection with myself and everything around me in a way that I hadn't before. And it wasn't like this God that was outside. It was what was around me right now, and how I ate and how I lived and how I treated people and how I treated animals, and that was and being open to the possibility of change, of like putting intention into something and something happening, that helping to create change through magic, through spirit, and also a big thing for me is starting to think of going from a thing of God to goddess, and that was at that point really revolutionary for me. It was just in terms of how my thinking and seeing how part of the reason I felt so separate from God was because God was male and I wasn't part of that, and even in the messages that were given out in churches, I wasn't part of it. So it was a place that I felt, being at the peace camp, I felt like I was part of it, that I could relate on a spiritual level and feel like that it wasn't something outside of myself that was alien to me. I think one of the reasons why firewalking for me was so important was because it was so different from what I had done before, and there was so much of a trust. But firewalking, like I remember the very first time I was in a circle of women and we had done this ritual, and we had the logs burning, and they had come into coals, and the coals were raked, and the first time I went, I was like, okay, I want to be part of this ritual, and I don't know if I'm going to feel comfortable, if I'm going to want to firewalk, but that's okay. And that was also put out, that you don't have to do it, and only do it if you really want to, if you feel that it's right for you to do it, or you feel called to do it. There wasn't any pressure to have to walk across the coals to be part of this circle. And I remember part of the ritual that I connected with a lot was there was a part where we created our circle, an actual circle with grain that we put around, or flour around the hole, and then you also, at one point in the circle, created a little circle around yourself energetically, and that was about just being within yourself as an individual and having that time, that kind of quiet time with yourself, of creative connecting. And so you had your individual power and your collective power, and how they're both important. You can't really separate them completely. And that was really, what would I say, inspiring, I guess. There was something about that really resonated with me. And the very first time I walked, I remember seeing, other people were walking, and I was like, I'm not so sure. And then I just felt like I wanted to, but I was concerned, because I was concerned that I was going to get burned. I have in one of my feet, I have a toe that goes under. And I was like, I don't know. I don't, there's more likely to get burned if my toe's under. So I had this thing of I'm not going to do it. And then I just decided, it's not even really decide, but I felt like, okay, I just had a moment and I did it. And I didn't get burned. I know that I ended up doing, I don't remember how many firewalks, and if you count them, because I can't remember how many actual firewalks, because there's how many rituals I did, and there's how many times maybe within one ritual that you went across. So, but it was a number of times over the course of that fall. And I never got burned. I know some other women did, not, I don't remember how badly. I don't think it was really badly. I mean, I think there was someone who got something on the bottom of her feet. I remember also, though, someone saying, or Lindsay saying, that if you got a spot on one part, that can be related to reflexology. And that could be a spot that you have in your body, that something's going on. And I found that interesting. And I did have something on my foot, and it was a kidney point, and I'm someone who's had problems with kidney stones before. In '84, I can tell you that as the fall happened, there were fewer women, but there were still women there, but it had a different flavor because suddenly it was getting colder, and so we were in the house a lot more. And so I would say that's more where I did more of like you're chopping the wood, you're hauling the water in. There's these things that's kind of like, now you're learning how to rough it. Now I'm learning what does it mean to live in a way that you have to carry you use the sink and then the water goes into a bucket. Who ever heard of something like that? You have to call it outside and pour it into the, what do you call those?
Seepage pit.
Seepage pit, but it had some other name too. But anyway, we just had to carry it. We had this whole filter system because we didn't have a septic tank set up, so we brought it out to this thing, and so that I think one thing that happened for me is I got physically stronger. My arms got stronger. I felt like I was in some ways becoming healthier because I was just doing much more physical work, and I got to really use my body in a way that I hadn't, especially after being in school and all that kind of thing. And so I think one thing that happened for me is that I felt more comfortable in my body than I had, that's the other thing also I would say that happened for me probably starting in 83 and 84 is in this place where here you are, this place, and you're backline women without shirts on, and the women of all different sizes. I felt more, I think it was a place where I started becoming more, more comfortable than I had been with my body, and feeling more accepted, even though had been feeling more physically different because of having a visible physical disability, but not feeling like it didn't matter. It really didn't matter in terms of whether I had my shirt on or shirt off or whatever. So I felt more accepting of myself and feeling accepted by people, and that was a new thing for me to feel comfortable in that way. And also, it was new, but it was also in some ways just different because I wasn't really hanging around with women who took their shirts off. Everyone had their shirt on, no matter whatever your body looked like. So there was that thing, but just women, you're working, you get hot, you take your shirt off. What's the big deal? So that was all very liberating. I guess that would be the word. It was very liberating just to be able to do that, and then of course it's getting colder. So as I said, so it became more of being indoors more, and also it had a quieter energy about it. I think, at least with the group that started being there was still things that were happening at the gate, but it became more ritual, I guess. More rituals started happening. And we would have we had a fire circle that was at the back of the land, not at the back where the fence was, but more between the two meadows in the back, and it became more internally focused as opposed to outwardly focused at the base. And I felt it kind of like more internal growth. And it wasn't even a conscious thing per se, it was just kind of what was happening. And I take it now as like being also kind of like a seasonal thing. It's kind of how I relate to it. I know in my own body cycle, as the summer moves into fall, and the fall, I more like want to be, I don't want to go to big, loud events. I kind of more like to be quieter, or be with fewer people, and so it makes sense on that cyclical sense and level. And that was also something I was becoming more aware of too, as I became of cycles and what does all that mean, or what does that look like, and things I hadn't thought about in that way before.
Did you continue to do direct action that second summer? Did you ever cut the fence or spray paint on the base or around the base?
No, I didn't at Seneca. I never cut the fence at Seneca. In fact, it was a few years later I went to Greenham, and it seemed, but when I was at Seneca, it was still much more controversial about cutting the fence, and there was a lot more thing about was it violence or not violence, and I didn't feel inclined to do it personally. I don't think I went on the base again. I had my band and bar, and I didn't I didn't want to go to jail, and that was it for me in that way. And also there was so much I was getting not going on the base that it became more of like a peripheral focus instead of my main focus. Not totally peripheral, but it was just in one part and not the whole part. And I think I became more of like community focused as opposed to base focused.
What do you remember about how meetings happened or decisions were made?
Well, it seemed like there was a couple different levels. One, there was a regional meeting that happened periodically, and I know there was a structure to it. I don't remember if it was once every month or once every 3 months. I guess I don't remember how often it happened that way. And those, what I do remember of them was that there were very long meetings, and we would have a agenda that we would some of us came with agenda items, some of us at the beginning you would create your agenda, you would have your agenda item that you would all write down, and then you would go through it and make priorities or whatever, but we'd go through it, and these meetings lasted a long time, partly because there were a lot of agenda items, but also partly because we're working with consensus, and we were also coming through it. There were some women who were coming from off the land, who weren't living at the peace camp, but came because they were part of the land. They were part of the community who were of the peace camp, and so there was a little bit of us and them that happened with that. Those who felt like those of us who were living there who felt like we're here the day to day, and those who were coming who maybe had been part of it longer and had an idea and had their own ways of what does this look like from the outside. And I think that I remember at the time feeling like I definitely felt it kind of an us and them, even though individually I liked people, but there wasn't really much, like they weren't friends like the friends I had who were living there. And I felt sometimes like there wasn't as much understanding of what we were doing or what we were. There seemed like not as much, I don't know if mistrust, I guess mistrust a little bit of, there was, the peace camp, part of its purpose was to be a standing, what's the word? To be there because the base was there, and because nuclear weapons were being shipped from there, and to be a very public reflection of that, and putting it out into the world of this was going on. So there was that particular aspect of its mission for the peace camp. And then there was other things that were going on that were about creating community, and I think that for some women, especially women who weren't living there, that wasn't as important, and they were not seeing the importance of that, so felt like we were kind of slacking, or some women felt like we were slacking, and I think some of us who were living there then felt that as a judgment, and so then had our reactions. And also at the time there was some aspect, because those of seeing, here's the women who have the jobs and the money, and they're coming and telling us what to do. So there was some mistrust back and forth, and I think that the meetings reflected that, because there was a lot of having to get through the emotional stuff that in some ways wasn't being talked about, and in order to get through the agenda.
Do you have any recollection of how the idea of the July 6th 6 Minute to Midnight action came about, or how that was organized?
My recollection is there was a 6 minutes to midnight. 6 minutes was the amount of time. Okay, let me see if I can remember this correctly. 6. It was the clock, and I could have this wrong, so if someone can they have, there's the actual factual part of it, but my recollection is that 6 minutes is the amount of time it would take for a nuclear weapon, if it was launched, to hit the Soviet Union or vice versa. And I might have that wrong, but so there was that aspect of it. And part of the excitement for me anyway, and for the one of doing the 6 minutes to midnight, is that it was also, so those of us who would come from like a Take Back the Night march against, or thing around violence against women, and here was a perfect way to bring those two together, to bring the feminist stuff of violence against women and children, and the night, and Take Back the Night, and 6 minutes to midnight, and combining that, and I was pretty excited about that, because that kind of coalesced both of those things that were important to me, and I remember helping to make the flyers and putting out the publicity and about that, and I'm also remembering around that time of reading more and more of Starhawks. And remember, she wrote the the title's going to escape me. It's not the Spiral Dance. It's the do you remember the book? Anyway, there was a book of hers that the title will come to me, but it also was a lot about making those connections about what was going on in a global way, and also the personal and magic, and I don't know, it had all those connections. And Dream in the Dark, that was it, Dream in the Dark. So it was also about the power of the dark, the bad things that happen in the dark, just of bringing that all together, and going to this base, and didn't we go to the Q zone for the, so here was this thing that was this place, it wasn't just the main gate, it was like, here was this place that was supposed to, where these weapons were being stored, and just taking it, naming it, and going there, and and it's kind of it's before the words breaking the silence became part of what was people talked about, but it was that kind of thing, and it was very, very powerful. It was probably one of my probably one of my favorite actions. And one thing I do remember about that action is being there and putting all these things, weaving on things on the fence, and there being a woman who was there, who was taking lots and lots of pictures. And I realized that I didn't like her energy. She looked like she just was very intently taking photographs, and I kind of knew that she was some type of government or military person taking pictures, and that made me even more aware of the whole, how much they were feeling, how much they wanted to know who we were. And I started thinking more about, did they have files on us, or did they have files on me? And I wasn't frightened by it, because I didn't have anything to hide, but I became more aware of that aspect of it.
Do you remember how money came in during that winter of '84? Were there donations? Were women on stipends? How did you support yourself? And what was your sense of others supporting themselves that winter?
That first winter, the '84?
'84.
Gosh. There were donations that came in. I don't remember getting a stipend, so if there were I know there had been stipends the previous year, but I don't know if there were stipends the year I was there. I don't think there were, but I could be remembering wrong. I think that we bought food, and we got day-old bagels and all those things, and maybe that came from the donations. I don't remember not really needing very much money.
And do you remember when you helped writing checks for electricity or phone, or how bills were paid at the camp?
I think those came through donations, and I don't remember writing checks. I think that Andrea did most of that there. Mm-hmm. I lived there. When we got to the deep winter, after people left after the fall, it was Andrea, Brenda, Thundercloud, myself, and Lynn. There were 5 of us who lived there through the deep part of the winter. Yes, but where did they live? Um, where I think Andrea, maybe she lived in the attic. Seems like she was not in the same place. I think maybe she was in the attic, but I could be remembering wrong. And I had a little space upstairs near the near the stairs. I was in the dorm room. I think eventually I got a little room when somebody moved out. And I think TC was Thundercloud TC was up there somewhere.
And some people have talked about crushes or relationships of sexual nature that developed for them at the encampment. Did you have any of those kinds of things happen those first years? That you feel at liberty to discuss with us?
I had crushes. I had a little something with Lindsay. And but besides that, I think I was shy. I had whatever. It's still, I was more of like, I didn't really have much going on in that way. I think it was mostly shyness.
Energy. Did other women have that kind of energy going on? Was sexuality something that was a part of the day-to-day and talked about or shared? Or
Yeah, there were other, sexual lover connections between women there. Yeah, that was a thing that happened quite a bit there. So it definitely was, a part of it. And that was definitely a part of it. I think that was that part of that whole thing of the personal the political personal as well as the political external, just living in community.
And how about just physical intimacy or demonstrative, is that the word?
Yeah, there was a lot of physical, are you talking about physical connection?
Yeah,
yes.
Massage or
yeah, lots of massage, lots of cuddle dates, a lot of, physical touch. It was definitely a place where that was really great. I mean, it seems like more so there than most places I'd been, or maybe all places I'd been, besides people that you were really close to, just, holding hands or hugging or massages or not, just much more than any place I'd been. So that was pretty revolutionary in that way. I don't know if I've experienced that in the exact same way at other places. I mean, I've lived on women's land since then, and there's some level of that, but mostly not. Mostly that, I think it was unique in that way, at least in my own experience of what I've experienced in other places.
Looking back, or even at the time, do you have any thoughts on why that was true, why the environment was that way at the encampment?
Maybe because we were really trying to live our vision. And one of the things about being there, especially through the winters, I felt there was this thing of, and I remember being part of our newsletter of trying to describe this in there too, of what we were trying to do was live our vision for how we wanted the world to be. And not just talk about how we wanted the world to be. And it's whether we were able to do that or not in all different levels, obviously, or not, maybe not so obviously we weren't able to. They were just because we come with our stuff we carry into it, whatever our baggage is. We all had baggage, but that was our hope, that we could live this way, live in a way that was create a different way of being. And I think that was part of it, of just being open-hearted and loving, and I think that's part of it. But I think there was, I don't know, there was some magic, there was something that was about it that's hard to just pin down for why there and not someplace else. But it was kind of in a sense of like you're home, you're here, you're part of this, and you're accepted. And at the same time that I'm saying that, I know that not everyone did feel accepted, and there was differences, and there were judgments flying. So there's like a contradiction, but at the same time, both are true.
Were songs a part of that winter?
That particular winter, music. I would say music. A lot of, I think through the winter, that particular winter, we played a lot of albums. And I remember hearing a particular Chris Williamson album over and over again that Thundercloud liked. Stranger in Paradise, I believe it was. And especially when, well, let's just say, a certain a certain relationship and a certain amount of beer had been drank. There was a stranger pair. Oh my God! So
Beer? Wait a minute. Time out. Beer at the peace encampment? Do you want to rephrase that?
You're joking, right?
Yes.
Okay. So other times, I would say more fall, summer. There was more music that was played, drumming. Maybe the following spring when Hershey came with her guitar, more music that happened, and that was a whole different type. I wouldn't say different type of. It was a different type of music. It was a different creating music as opposed to just to listening to music. And the winter I was there, we more like listened to music and. But there was a whole thing that happened with the spring of '85, and it became a little wilder in some ways. Well, Helen moved there. Helen, freed woman at the time, and she was American but had been at Greenham. She came with her guitar and her music. Hershey came with her guitar and her music, and then a lot of jamming started happening, and they were both very encouraging of let's make songs together, and those of others of us participating, and out of that came this wonderful thing that was very fluctuated depending on who it was in it, except Hershey and Helen were always the main ones, was the Average Dyke Band. And that was a blast because they played, and I remember I had my little drum I had that I would drum away. That was my and we would just play into the night all this music and create this music and write these songs, and they were all very, very lesbian, what's the word, more than lesbian, positive, lesbian focused, lesbians are the greatest music. And yeah, and and we just let it fly, and that was so much fun. I had so much fun doing that. And we actually went out, and it wasn't, we did little concerts at the camp. We went to Rochester or someplace. We played at some cafe, but more of it was just being in the pit, as we called it, at the house of the peace camp, and playing, and it was a blast. I still carry in fact, my mother, I was just talking to her the other day, and she goes, "Oh, you're going to see Hershey?" And remember those songs from my mother's, I gave her a recording of it, and my mother even liked it. So I think that she might have forgotten a little bit of the fuck you type things in the music. But she, I think one difference is that there's always been music at the peace camp, and there are a lot of songs that we did that were peace songs. But this, again, was a difference because suddenly it was coming out of our personal things and relationships, and it was political, but it was definitely the personal political, and it was a different style of music and songs and creating songs. Prior to then, I wrote a song, and it was about it was to the tune of "Staying Alive," and it was about anti-nuclear, but suddenly we're singing about, battering and rape, and it became, and it was different.
Did you write "Staying Alive"?
Not for the Doobie Brothers, but
Thanks for clearing that up for me, because I was pretty sure that you had pinned that. But the parody of it? You wrote that?
They did. It was, yeah, on the bus to Washington. The long ride to Washington in '83.
Do you remember any other songs that were created? Was the Seneca Rebel Women or Neutron Bomb or
Seneca Rebel Women, I think that was with Cassie and somebody.
Did you play an instrument other than the drum?
I started playing guitar, and I think I always had a little bit of guitar playing, but not much. But then towards the end, I guess it was more like in the summer of '85, I think it was '85, I started writing some songs. I remember in terms of the ADB's thing of doing one of the verses from Revolution Talk, but the other songs are songs I did more by myself, and I did one that was a lullaby, and part of what was that came out of is that I used to have, and this was even pre going to the peace camp, a lot of nightmares, regular nightmares, and often it was like some man was coming, or there was something that was going to happen that was bad, and or I remember dreams of like being in the middle of a war and shooting was happening, just a lot of like those intense kind of dreams that I would just wake up, in fright. And I remember that I had a dream, another dream around war, and then I wrote and I remember that one night I had like fallen asleep, or was just maybe like laying down like Woody is here, and just hearing women playing music and singing. And so I wrote this song, Sing Me a Lullaby, lull me to sleep with the song of the women, the song I can keep. I'd rather dream of women than of nuclear war and men. That was another verse. So it's just, that came out of that experience of, wanting this, here's this peaceful sound that was soothing, with a juxtaposition of these nightmares I've been having of this violent world. And so that's where it came from. And it was also, it was inspired by hearing women singing and their music. So I don't remember when I shared it for the first time. I probably did it shyly, because I'm kind of shy about sharing songs I write, but it was one of those things I kind of just did on my own. And in that period, I had a slew of songs I wrote, or 5. For me, that was a slew, 5 or 6 or 7. And then, but that was the one that was more peace camp connected. I think usually I sang it, because I don't remember the first time it happened, but I do remember the feeling of hearing someone singing at once and going, whoa, this is someone singing a song that's mine, which was I had never had before, but I can't say the date and place or anything like that. But it was very empowering just to have to have the song and then to sing it. And I remember that summer of '85 of going to the Radical Women Conference in Cleveland and singing it there was a workshop that someone was doing. Maybe Mike was doing it. But there was a workshop, and then I sang that song at the workshop. And that was like, I remember that, I don't know, now I was singing something not just at the peace camp, but for these people in a whole another state.
And was there a conflict for you, or did you hear critiques from people at the encampment or who lived off the land about songwriting and whether or not playing songs, whether or not that was revolutionary or should be a part of the encampment?
I think that the vibe I got sometimes wasn't so much about the songwriting. It was, here's all this work to do. I mean, it could have been anything. We could have been doing jigsaw puzzles, or not something else that was a creative. Jigsaw puzzles isn't the word. We could be painting, but art, creating art. But there's still, it's the thing between. It seemed more of like, we have to raise money. We're doing, there's a lot of like logistical things that have to happen, and seeing it as kind of as slacking on the real work. It wasn't the real work. And so there was that certainly that played a part in it. And I don't remember it being per se that you shouldn't write music, but I think it was more of that it wasn't seen as being as valuable. Or maybe, looking back on it, maybe it was seen as being valuable, but more time should be spent on other stuff. I mean, of course, what I remember looking back is how valuable that felt to me at the time. And I think it got the word out so much about the peace camp. So it had its value.
Are there any of those songs that stayed with you over the years, or are they something that are in the past?
They've stayed, I think Revolution Talk has stayed with me. You know, I would say that it's not necessarily songs that I sing a lot anymore, but when I do, it brings back all these happy feelings. Because what I remember is singing them with a group of women, with all these women friends, or even ones I didn't know so well, and we were just so happy to be doing this together and being at the peace camp and singing out and creating these things, and it was just it was a joyful feeling, you know. So it just brings back those feelings of that time and the magic of that time, because it's different, you know. Now it was its moment. It was a long moment, and now it's a different moment. I didn't have any. I had $10 to my name. I still remember. I had $10 to my name. And we decided a bunch of women are going to go to Michigan, and I wanted to go, and I really did want to go, and it was all so exciting. All these friends of mine were going. I wanted to go, but all I had was $10. And then probably it was Kai. Somebody was like, "Go anyway. It's going to be okay." And I was like, and I was such a cautious one, more cautious than, but I was just like. I mean, I wasn't totally, but I was there, but I was just like, it was not in my, it was hard, because I'm also, it was just to go only with $10, but I was like, okay, so I just changed my mind, got in the back of this jalopy of a truck that had Amazon witches painted on the side. We had a canvas over in case it rained in the back, but 3 people in the front, 3 people in the back, and this really silly thing with Ta and Helen and Kai and I guess Reba and we had, you know, I think it was even made these sprouts and hung them from the back, but not thinking about all the exhaust. Here you get these sprouts so that you have this, like, you know, this thing that's supposed to be anti-cancer, and then you're hanging them and exhaust fumes hitting them. It was kind of silly, but anyway, it was just that life intention, you know. And here we, you know, and we did make it. There had been a problem at Michigan, I think, the previous summer, that some of the workers there had been organizing around workers' issues, and some of them had been told not to come back. And we decided we were going to go anyway, and to make a point and not go and burst in and try to blend into many of the other naked women, but to be a visible presence as the peace camp, to confront this classist position and way that the Women's Music Festival is being run. So I got there, and how did I get in there? Was it somebody who worked there who had band, or was that a different year? There was somehow I got into, I don't remember, I got in there. I really don't remember how I got in, but I got in with some other women. And I don't know if we snuck in or if someone brought us in. But then we started putting up, you could sign up for workshops or set up if you wanted to do a workshop. And we had one on classism at Michigan Women's Music Festival. And I think the ADB went on the open mic stage, and I think we won a prize even, or one. I was just, anyway, and there we were. And I think the Michigan ones, for whatever reasons, decided just to let us be there, because we weren't, instead of making a big stink about it. And we did workshops and had a lot of fun besides that. Set up our tents. We just kind of crashed the place. And not everyone did. Some people paid and went.
Was there anything particular that you could tell us about peace camp women, that they would be the ones to confront that at Michigan, or even at other places? What was it about being a peace camp woman outside of peace camp?
Well, I think part of the thing with peace camp women is that we weren't, It's hard to say why. I think it was our experience of being at the peace camp that we were already pushing our heads against authority. And we were also very much of anarchist bent. And so to have somebody say, and it was kind of like, if we saw something that wasn't right, and I would say especially within the women's community, because we had high standards for ourselves and for others, that we would confront it. And we felt like confronting peacefully was the way you had to do it. And if you have a right to do something, you just do it. If you have a right to be on the space because of what they're doing, you cross the line. You don't let it hold you back. If there's a women's festival that's not allowing some women to come back because they've organized in the past, you don't just let them do it. You make a stand. You got to stand up and speak your mind, because no one else will do it for you. So there's this whole philosophy and experience of doing that already, and doing it even with each other, that you just did it, and what's the worst going to happen? They're going to toss you out, or you have to go to jail, and you've already had that happen before. So, and then if they do try to do it, you're going to make a big stink. I mean, it was just like, and then they're going to look like the fools. So there was just, I think, a certain sense of righteousness and a certain sense of fearlessness, and a certain sense of you just got to do it, and a certain sense of we're right and you're wrong, and so what we say should go. So it was a mixture. It was a mixture of it all.
So you did Michigan, and then you did the Amazon Witch journey out west.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened in your life next?
When did people go to Europe? December. So I think as I came back, and there was talk about going, and I knew I didn't have money to go, but I wanted to go. So I decided to work and save money so that I could go to Greenham. I wanted to go to Greenham, and so that's what I did. I saved money and I went to Greenham the following, end of May of '86. I had never gone out of the country before. I had never done that, and I felt I wanted to make it happen. I wanted to go to Greenham. So that's what I didn't have, my mom could afford the plane ticket to fly me from California to New York, or I don't know, maybe she had to borrow the money, I don't know, but I certainly didn't have the resources for my family just to go to Europe. So, and I needed to get the airfare, so that's what I did. I was at Greenham for, I think, 7 months.
Did you get arrested while you were there?
I got detained. I don't know if there were charges ever. I think charges were dropped. I never had to go to court. But I did. Things were scarier at Greenham for me.
Uh-huh.
Things were scarier in terms of even the military police and all that. Things were a little more things were more confrontational. I got back from Greenham in December of '86. Oh, yeah. When I came back, I must have tried to make money, but somehow I came back to Seneca because I ended up moving with women. I started having gatherings with women who we started talking about wanting to live together. And a bunch of us, Hershey, Loba, Mar, Kiara, myself, Helen, Luna, Lindsay, who already lived out here, but there's all this talk of we wanted to live in community together. We wanted to live someplace that had radical community, that was lesbian, lots of lesbians, and that and we had to decide where we wanted to live, and we decided to move out to the Bay Area together so that we could do our radical community thing together and take it with us and create a whole new thing. So that's what we did.
Why not stay and do that at the peace camp as you had been doing?
I think it was to live in a city and be where there's radical stuff going on, and how do you take what you got from Seneca and take it with you someplace else. And I think for me, I also realized I couldn't live at Seneca forever. I don't know if I really ever wanted. I wanted to. It was time for me to do something different, and I wanted to do it. And the thought of doing that with these other like-minded women, or like-minded in certain ways anyway, was very exciting.
Was the idea of zapping a part of your consciousness either at Seneca or Greenham at that point?
Zapping was, yes, it was. I wasn't majorly involved in the zapping stuff. I think things got more about zapping when I wasn't at Seneca. And when I was at Greenham, there was talk of it too, but I think when I came back from Greenham, there was more talk at the Peace Camp about zapping than there had ever been. So I was kind of on the, I knew about it and was reading about it and all that kind of thing, hearing about it, but I wasn't part of the organizing around it.
Do you remember having any emotional or intellectual reaction to it?
I thought theoretically that yes, it could be happening. Maybe there was possibly it wasn't happening, and I didn't personally experience any of it. And not at heart, I'm often pretty skeptical, and skeptical not meaning that, skeptical more of like, yes, it could be, maybe it's not. No, it's not until you prove me wrong. So I was kind of reserving, like, oh, this is important to look into, and I wasn't 100% convinced. I wasn't 100% convinced either way. I was kind of agnostic about it, but more siding to the zapping.
Your stint at taking the Peace Camp to the West Coast, after that happened, were there times you visited the Peace Camp later?
Yes, I did visit the Peace Camp later partly because my family, my mom and my brother, lived in Central to New York. I would come to the Peace Camp usually at least once a year for a visit. And there were some years that actually visited my mother that I wasn't able to as the years got further along. But that in the 80s I did. And then I spent a chunk of time at the Peace Camp in the summer of 93.
Why?
Because I was going through a heartbreak, because I'd broken up with somebody, and I went to my mom's, and then I spent about 3 or 4 weeks at the Peace Camp, 3 weeks maybe. Maybe it wasn't 3 or 4 weeks, but I spent a chunk of time there.
And who was there? What was going on?
Estelle was there. Lindsay was there. I don't really remember all who was there. There weren't tons of women. Was Z there? I don't remember. I don't remember all who was there. I was kind of going through my own internal turmoil. But everything's better now. Remember. In fact, I'm not even sure if that's really what happened. Did I really go with them, or did I just hear about it from them? Anyway, but my first real memory of going there was
my first real memory.
Maybe it was
Fabricated memory.
It's all getting a little. It's blurry. It was so many years ago. I think that's part of the problem.
Okay. That's a hard question.
So, hey, it's Mr. Softy.
That's in reaction to an ice cream truck going by. So when I transcribe this, someone didn't burst into the room or something. She's disassociating now. It's her alternate personality. This is Softy. Good thing zapping was just a myth.
I don't feel like I need to talk a lot more about it. Okay.
Do you want to talk about separatism?
Well, eventually. I don't need to get there yet.
She doesn't really seize the moment someone just put it up till another day. Can we do this next week? I'm not ready to talk about that.
Separatism.
Okay, so let's talk about, when did you first notice a desire to procrastinate?
What? Oh, so in conclusion, no, I'm just Peace Camp,
So smooth.
hell of a time.
That's so cool.
You have Queen of gracious transition.